Hello, I'm Ailian, and I've lived in quite a few different apartments here in Beijing, China. I last moved a couple months ago, and since then I wanted to make a very extensive and complete guide on how to find and rent an apartment here in China. I want to talk you through the process all the way from finding a budget to actually moving in. So this might be a bit long, but if you're someone who's looking to rent an apartment here in China, I hope you finish this video feeling like you know what to do and all of your questions have been answered. If by the end they haven't been answered, feel free to leave a comment and I will try my best to answer your questions. So first, let's go over what your budget should be and what options you have. So we have 正租 and 合租. 正租 is basically you rent the whole place yourself, and a 合租 means you're gonna have roommates. Not like your own family kind of roommates, but I mean strangers or something. You can also do 合租 without knowing the roommates or with knowing the roommates. Like you could 合租 with your friend, or you can also through some of the apps, sometimes they'll set you up with total strangers. As for budgeting, you kind of have to consider where you're moving. So I really only have experience in Beijing. If you're moving to Beijing, which is where I've been living the whole time, and you plan on getting a one-room apartment in the city, kind of more downtown city area, you should expect to be paying about 5,000 to 7,000 kuai a month. Though the farther you go out from the city, the cheaper it gets. So for example, I live pretty far from the city and we have a 3-bedroom apartment for 3,000 a month. And then if you're going to do 合租, if you're in the city center, it's probably going to be around 2,000 to 4,000 a person. But once you get farther away, it can be as low as 1,000 a month. That being said, Shanghai and Beijing are the most expensive cities to rent in. Their prices are pretty similar, but other cities, even big ones such as Guangzhou, are significantly cheaper with I think about 3,000 to 5,000 kuai a month for 1 bedroom. And then small cities can be super cheap, 1,000 kuai a month or less. Next, we're gonna go on to different types of property. So speaking from my experience in Beijing, I can say there's 5 different types of apartments or rental properties that you can get. I would categorize them into the following: 1, new apartments; 2, walk-ups; 3, hotel style; 4, Hutong; and 5, villas. So new apartments are basically just newer buildings usually. They have an elevator. They're just kind of normal apartment buildings. It's a pretty broad category. And then walk-ups are pretty common here. They're older buildings and they do not have an elevator. They only have stairs and they tend to be 5 to 6 floors tall. That's something to consider if you're renting. I personally would not want to rent anything above the 3rd floor, but that's your choice. Usually it's cheaper as they go up though too. And then the hotel style, or sometimes also called brand apartments, are apartments that usually contain small 正租 1-person only apartments, though I think sometimes they will also do roommate situations. And some of them are even rentable as actual hotels for a few days. And these are usually quite flexible and can rent month to month, and will often have common spaces and gyms and cafes and stuff like that inside. And then for Hutong apartments, they're usually 1 or 2 floor properties. They're not I don't mean apartment buildings in Hutong areas. Usually these properties are old buildings that have been renovated and subdivided into a few different units. They usually come in either just one flat floor, a lofted apartment, or 2 floors. And usually the front door opens onto a small courtyard just away from the main alleyway. My previous apartment was actually a Hutong loft apartment. So if you're interested in seeing that, you can watch my apartment tour from back then. Also, if you're insanely rich and you want to blow tens of thousands of kuai a month, you could get an entire courtyard to yourself, but that would be insane in my opinion, personally. But hey, it's really cool. And then lastly, we have villas, which are basically just houses. They're generally cookie cutter houses and gated community type of situations. If you're moving to an urban area, this is probably out of the question unless you're super rich. But in rural areas, they're actually much more affordable. Like in Huairou, you can get a villa for like 2,000 to 3,000 USD a month for like a 4+ bedroom house, basically. So. Next, let's talk about how to search for an apartment. So for a lot of China, there's 2 like big name realtor agencies, which is Waijia and Lianjia. For a lot of like urban areas, you can find apartments through these 2 realtors. They have a lot of property, especially in Beijing. They have a lot of urban property. You can either like use apps to be able to contact them, or you could also just walk into one of their stores and talk to a realtor. So in my experience, if you're looking in a more rural area, or if you're looking for a special type of property like Hutong apartments, they're not as useful. They tend to not have as much property. These places are much more likely to be managed by smaller local companies. As for apps you can use, Waijia and Lianjia both have their own apps, which are trustworthy and offer both Zhengzu and Hezu. These apps are pretty straightforward, and from what I gather, they offer a much more traditional house hunting experience. They also both offer their own like secondary apps, Ziroom or Ziru, and Beike for Lianjia, and Xiangyu for Waijia. These apps are designed to do more of the apartment hunting process online in the app. From what I can understand, the difference between Lianjia, Ziroom, and Beike is that Beike is a platform for like a lot of different realtors, not just Lianjia realtors, to post listings. And then Lianjia is an app for posting basically just from Lianjia agents. And then Ziroom completely manages the whole rental and like property management process. For example, if I have any problems or for when I have to turn in rent, I contact my landlord. But if you use like Ziroom, you would contact the Ziroom app people. They will deal with it, and you don't deal with the landlord directly, from what I can understand. And then for that other app that's connected to Waijia, Xiangyu, they're pretty similar to Ziroom, I think. It's also quite like they handle all of that stuff. Also, Ziroom is known for having a very basic style, like it's kind of like, you know, IKEA furniture, white walls, and they also have a lot of affordable Hezu options. When Guilherme and I first met, he was actually renting a Ziroom apartment. It was 1 bedroom and a 4-bedroom apartment, and he was paying 2,000 a month for that. He only knew one of his roommates, and then the rest, like, they had keys so that they could lock their own bedroom doors, and then just like the kitchen and the bathroom was like shared space, and then they would have like a cleaning lady come and clean as part of the whole deal. I think Ziroom and Xiangyu also have their own like brand apartments that you can view on their apps. Now, I can't talk about apartment hunting apps without mentioning 58 or 58同城, whatever it's called. It's probably the most complete apartment listing app out there, but it does come with some caveats. They have listings from all sorts of realtors, not just the big 2, and sometimes they'll have listings from landlords themselves. But because of how many listings they have out there and how many sources they get them from, there is a possibility of there being like fake listings. So if you use this app, you kind of have to be vigilant. If an apartment seems too good to be true, or like the price just doesn't make sense, there's probably a reason why. If a realtor is asking for way too much personal information or asking for you to pay for things online without, you know, signing anything first, that's also a big red flag that isn't normal. This app also does have like, when you search, they also have like a safe option and like an examined real listing, like a certified listing option, so that it can help you like kind of avoid anything that might be fake. I personally actually prefer using this app, even though I've heard some people say like don't use this app because of, you know, chance of there being fake listings. I do like using this app because, especially for the last place that I moved in and now that I'm living somewhere more rural, this app was the only way that I could really find those kinds of properties that I was interested in. Now I'll go over the foreigner friendly options because the previous ones may not be good to use if you don't speak Chinese, or you're not that comfortable speaking Chinese for something like as important as this. The aforementioned Zeroom actually does come with an international version, but I think the prices are actually higher than they are in like the normal Zeroom. There's also an app that I've used before that has worked for me before called Wellsy, which I do recommend, I suppose. This one is very foreigner friendly. I think it was actually designed with the idea of having an app for foreigners to use. This app appears to have listings for like pretty much every large city. I don't know how many cities they have it at this point, but if you're moving to like a big city, they probably will have listings in the city. So even if you're not in Beijing, you can also still use this app. Most of these listings are people looking for roommates or people looking for someone to take over their lease. But there are definitely a few postings from landlords and stuff like that. There's also a lot of tags for you to search through, so people can tag their listings as pet friendly, or they want their roommate to be someone who can be a friend to them, LGBT friendly. They might limit like men only, women only, you know, for roommates and stuff, what kind of lifestyle they have, stuff like that. I actually had a really good experience with this because my first year of college here, I ended up renting through here, and I rented with a roommate, and I actually ended up arranging, like I called her beforehand before I even went to China, and I was able to just move in straight from the airport. I can't guarantee that you can do that with anyone. It seems kind of crazy that she let me like become her roommate without meeting me in person first. But yeah, I had a pretty good experience on here. It doesn't handle like the renting process for you. It's more just like a way to contact people. If you're moving to Beijing specifically, an option you have is to look in the classified sections of thebeijinger.com. I actually have never used this for renting an apartment, but I do love looking through their classifieds a lot. They also have stuff that is not related to house hunting on there. Another option is that some people will use WeChat groups, though I am completely unfamiliar with how that works. I've never tried to join like a apartment renting WeChat group, but they do exist. Just saying. So let's talk about touring apartments. On apartment apps, they usually will have at least photos of the apartment, if not also like video tours and those like 3D AR tours where you can like click to walk through the house. I would use these to narrow down your options. I wouldn't just like decide on a place just based on those. I would always recommend like going to the actual apartment so you can see everything yourself, to make sure everything's okay, and also so you can get like a feel of what kind of building it is and what kind of area it's in. Also, if you end up visiting multiple properties with one realtor, I would be prepared to hold on to the back of a moped for dear life, because some realtors will drive mopeds between properties and they might just say, get on back, and then you will cling to that little tiny seat for dear life. Unless you want to hug them, but that's kind of creepy, and you probably don't know your realtor like that. Next, we're going to talk about the fees that you should expect. So first thing is a realtor fee. So if you're renting with a realtor, you'll probably have to pay them a fee equivalent to 1 month's rent. There might be cases where that's not how much it is, but that's the norm. So if they're charging significantly more than 1 month's rent, there is something wrong there. They probably shouldn't be charging that much. I've never heard of someone charging more than 1 month's rent. But I'm talking about the realtor fee, not like the whole move-in cost. Next is the deposit. So deposit should also be equal to 1 month's rent. Assuming nothing disastrous happens with the apartment, you should be getting that money back when you move out. If you break your lease, I don't think you're guaranteed to get the money back, though if you can find someone to replace you, or they can find someone to replace you pretty quickly, you should be getting that deposit back as well. At least my experience, I've always got my deposit back even if I move out early. So then when it comes to rent, you'll also obviously have to turn in some rent when you move in. And I would say that there's 4 different kind of like payment plans. that come with renting a house. So that's either monthly, seasonal, half year, or yearly. The most common is seasonal, which means that you will pay 3 months of rent every 3 months. The other 3 are less common. I've pretty much only seen like monthly payment plans with hotel style apartments because they're pretty flexible. And maybe if you have a shorter lease, though generally speaking, like 99% of leases are 1 year. There's some cases where, you know, maybe they plan under construction, they might rent it out for 6 months, something like that. But 99% of the time, a lease is 1 year only. I'm actually currently living in a place with a half year plan though. So we pay 6 months of rent every 6 months. So we moved in July. So we paid 6 months of rent in July, and then in the winter we have to pay 6 months again. So I think this option is more common for places that are harder to rent out. For example, I actually live in a small town within Beijing, so there are not many residents here and there are not a lot of people moving in and moving out of places. So to kind of like protect themselves against possibly me just moving out and leaving them with an empty apartment and no money, we have to pay with a half year plan. I've also seen a bit of like yearly rent plans where you just like when you move in, you pay an entire year of rent at once. I've seen that quite a bit with the villas that are around here, which are quite expensive and I'm assuming pretty hard to rent out. Next is a heating fee. So this is a kind of fee that some places might have and some might not. A lot of buildings in Beijing specifically, or in general like the north, will have public heating, especially older places, which means that there is a metal heater or several metal heaters in the apartment that supply heat. Just enough so you don't die, in my opinion. It's not super warm. This is not like a metered fee based on how much you use. It's just a one-time like fee for supplying the heat. It's charged at some point in November, I believe. So depending on when you move in, you may or may not be charged right away. The rate here, I think, is 30 kwai per square meter. So they do calculate how much that fee is based on how large the apartment is. But also, yeah, some apartments just don't have public heating. For example, my previous apartment in the Hutong just didn't have public heating. So I never had to pay a heating fee. And in the south, because it's a warmer climate, they also don't have public heating, so they wouldn't have a heating fee. Next is management fees. So this is another one. Some places have, some places don't. I think some places also just include that in rent. But my current apartment, I did have to pay for management fee, and that was also calculated based on square meterage. So as far as this one goes, I think it just really depends on the apartment. Some places will have a management fee and some places won't. Usually if you're like looking on those apps, they might say in the description of the listing whether or not they have a management fee on top of that. Also, some apartments might have a service fee instead of like a realtor fee. For example, I think like Zeroom, they have a service fee instead of a realtor fee, where it's also just a lump sum based on how much your yearly rent is. These fees might vary a little bit. But for most cases, in total, when you move in, you should expect to pay 2 months of rent for the realtor and the deposit, plus however many months that you pay when you move in. So for most people that would be seasonal rent, so 3 months of rent, and then possibly heating and management. So for generally speaking, most people, you need to expect to prepare 5 months of rent for your move-in, and then based on the listing, maybe heating and management. Okay, we're almost done. I swear we're almost done. Now we can talk about moving in. So the whole like apartment hunting and moving in process can be very, very quick in China. There's no like application and rejection process here. I've never heard of any sort of like application for an apartment. Maybe if you live in some place like super fancy schmancy, but like if you want the apartment and you can pay for the apartment, you get the apartment. That's generally what the deal is here. It's as simple as finding the apartment, signing the contract, paying the fees, moving in, and then I guess, well, like going to the police station, registering. For my previous apartment, I literally found it within a few hours, which is crazy. And then I moved in like 2 days. Sometimes you can even find, sign, and move in the same day. If the apartment is still occupied, you might have to wait a few days or weeks for the previous tenant's lease to come to an end, and then you can move in. Though I would say more apartments will be shown when they're already empty, because once again, at least here in Beijing, the move-in process is very, very quick. So I think a lot of people don't see the need to try to start finding a new tenant before someone's moved out. So when it comes to signing the contract, obviously I would recommend to read the contract, but let's be real, I am far too lazy to read every word of the contract. I tend to just scan the important information, how much the rent is, from what date to what date are you allowed to live in the apartment, maximum amount of occupants, just all that stuff to make sure everything's right and there's no mistakes. I suggest every adult in the household sign the contract, and then they should also be giving you a copy of the landlord's ID, because you will need those to go register at the police station. So registering, this might seem like a little off topic or a little past the topic of renting an apartment, but it is extremely important. And a lot of people don't know the rules, so I really wanted to go over this. You have to register your address at the nearest police station within 24 hours. Not just any police station, it's the police station that is in charge of your area or your address. If you're not sure which one this is, you can ask the realtor, the landlord, and they should be able to tell you which police station you have to go to. I found that a lot of police stations are pretty lax about the 24-hour rule, but of course I would highly, highly recommend follow the rules and do it within 24 hours, as that is the rule. But if something happens and you take 2 or 3 days to go and register, you don't have to think you're a fugitive and have to run from the, it's not a big deal. In my experience, if I've ever missed the 24-hour deadline and come in a few days after, they do not care. But I don't recommend, just in case you get a police station where they really care about that. You'll need to bring your passport, the signed contract, and a copy of the landlord's ID to register. If you have a folder where you keep a lot of your documents, I would always recommend bringing that for any of this documentation sort of thing, just in case they ask to see something else. But those 3 that I mentioned should be the only things you need to register at the police station. There's a few other rules around registration that I thought I would go over, because not everyone is aware of these rules. So every time you leave the country and you come back, you have to register at the police station. Whether or not you have a new visa, you have to register at the police station again to be hey, I'm back. I'm still living here. That's all. If you get a new passport or whatever identification document you have to go register at the police station within 10 days, I believe. The sooner the better, please. Obviously, when you move addresses, you're gonna have to register again your new address. From my experience, if once you get your registration permit, if you're a student living here long term, once you get your registration permit, you don't need to go back for that, though that's just my experience. I'm not a lawyer or anything. So if you have any questions, if you're unsure about anything, you can always double check with the police or wherever you're getting your document from. Be hey, do I have to register again? And they'll tell you. Once again, if you accidentally break any of these rules, there's no need to run from the police or hide or anything. Usually it will end with you losing time and maybe a bit of money, which is really annoying, but it's not the end of the world. Just this past summer, I myself was detained by police because I accidentally took too long to register my new passport, and I lost a lot of time and 200 kwai, which I really miss, because I would have been able to buy 13 cups of my favorite milk tea with that 200 kwai, but I don't have it now. Yeah, I was fine in the end, but it was very annoying, and yeah, so make sure that you stay on top of that stuff. And if you ever are not sure, you can always just go and ask. When it comes to physically moving in, if you have a suitcase or just something like that, you just take whatever mode of transportation, you should be fine. If it's something you can just carry yourself. But if you have furniture or boxes, The most way of transporting those is huolala, which you can use. It's kind of like rentable U-Haul, but it comes with a driver. It's like a taxi, but they come with like minivans or like trucks, and they'll pick up your stuff. And you can like just call those through the mini apps in Alipay or WeChat. If you don't speak Chinese, I don't know how to help you. Maybe you have a friend that can help you with that. Or I think some of those apps that I mentioned earlier, maybe like the foreigner friendly ones, will include like a moving service, though I personally don't have any experience using those. So that should be all you need to know about the whole renting process here in China. Once again, if you have any questions, ask away in my comments. I will do my best to answer any of those questions you might have still. If you're interested in videos about China, living in China, my life in China, you can subscribe to my channel, and I will hopefully see you in the next video. Bye bye! Good morning, Gigi.